We're here today with Fatima, and pronounce your last name for us.
Yes, it's Fatima Iqbal-Zubair.
Okay. And you are running for Assembly District number 65. It's the newly reformulated Assembly District 65. Just add water to the mix and stir. So it appears as though you're running against an old adversary for the same district, Mr. Mike Gipson. So tell us, what's the difference between you and he?
Oh, how much time do I have?
Well, make it brief.
Make it brief. Okay, just bullet points, right? It's where our money's coming from, right? So I take no corporate, developer, police, even private charter school board member money. Like, my money is 100% clean, and he takes the most in corporate money and gifts in the entire assembly. So that's a huge contrast, because that affects votes. That's affected his voting record, like it does many legislators. The other policy difference I would say is that our environmental justice platform and what we stand for is completely different. Gipson has been city council member in Carson, as well as in Assembly District for, I think, 8+ years now. And he has always had, really low scorecards in the Sierra Club report card. He has been one of the ones to prevent environmental legislation from going through. I would be a leader in those issues. Especially looking at our district and knowing that we have one of the worst air qualities, we have so many port issues and trucking issues, and just health issues as a result, right, of the environmental injustices going on. I would be a leader in ensuring that, we are transitioning to clean energy, but doing it with keeping workers in mind as well, which is a big reason of why I'm running now, because that takes time. If you want to do it the right way, keep union jobs, and it takes time to change infrastructure on that grand of a scale. So that's another contrast. Something else I would say is that I would be part of the Progressive Caucus. The Progressive Caucus up there right now is very small. I think I can probably count the number of members in two hands, and that's why you don't see, good bills going through. We haven't had a good environmental bill since 2018. When we tried to overturn Costa Hawkins and Ellis, we weren't able to do that a few years ago. We couldn't shut down Aliso Canyon. We will see if we can pass AB 1400, the healthcare for all bill, but, it's taken this long, right? So I would be part of that caucus, and I would make sure I vote on behalf of the community and the people every single time, right? He is part of the moderate caucus, right? He votes, he does not vote for bills that would systemically transform, right, our communities. And also to put it simply, that's what it is. And that's what stymied a lot of progress, at the legislature.
And from your perspective, looking at the district, why is it that we keep getting corporate or moderate, as you call them, and Democrats elected versus progressives?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind, James, is campaign finance reform. The way I see it, I'm a teacher, so everyone knows a teacher's salary, right? And if you are from a working class community, if you are, honestly, anyone really living in our district, right? Our district is very working class as it is. It's almost impossible to really run for office, in this sort of climate. And the reason I've been able to do it is because, I'm privileged enough to have a partner who's an engineer who has a decent enough job where I can take this time off to fundraise and go to community meetings and things like that. But otherwise, it's virtually impossible, right, to run and put the time in to run a clean campaign. So that's why I believe we have seen moderates get through, because it's easy, right, to take all the money from all the industry and literally buy an election, right? If you don't have enough resources to get your name out, even if you're a great candidate, voters aren't going to know your name, and they're just going to go with name recognition, right?
So your day job is as a teacher, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you're also a mother? And you have how many children?
I have one son. I adopted my son when he was an orphan, actually. So I adopted him when he was 6 months old from Morocco.
Okay. And your nationality is Sri Lankan, as I recall.
Yes, I wasn't born there,
No.
My parents are from there. I'm see, when you said that, part of me was like, I'm American. I don't identify, I like, to be honest, yeah, I look, I suppose, foreign, and then as American, my biggest identity is I'm an American, because I wasn't born in Sri Lanka. I never lived there, really, so.
So you are,
Yeah.
in fact, a citizen by birth.
In here, I'm not a citizen by birth. I became a citizen here. So I am an immigrant, yes. My parents are from Sri Lanka, lived there 8 months. I was born in Dubai, immigrated to Canada, and then did high school and college, in New Jersey. So got my citizenship when I was in high school here in this country. Mm-hmm.
So tell me why you're in California. Tell me why you're in the 65th Assembly District.
Yeah.
What brought you here?
Yeah, just happenstance and life. Honestly, I never thought I would, run for office. So what brought me here, honestly, was that when I met my partner, who then wasn't my husband, but my partner, he was already working here. I was in school, and it was a time where I was able to move, right? It was just more convenient. And plus, I've always appreciated California, right? As much as, now knowing politically how much we can achieve and we haven't, it was an appealing place to live, right? It's warm here. It's generally, the people are progressive minded. So for someone that looks like me and has the beliefs that I do and the ideals that I do, it was a great place to live. So I was happy to move here. So I moved out here in 2009. And I've been in the 65th district just over a decade now.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You also are a teacher up at Cal State Dominguez, is that?
No, so I taught at Jordan High School. So that was my full-time job. Now in my capacities, I mentor my robotics team, and that's my capacity being involved with my students, because the campaign is pretty much taking my time up almost full-time. So. Mm-hmm.
So if there was one thing that you could do as a progressive member of the state assembly, there's obviously multiple,
mm-hmm.
but what would be your highest priority?
Campaign finance reform would be one of the top, because I see that as overarching and affecting every single issue, from environmental justice to housing to healthcare, whether it's developer money or fossil fuel money, right? Or health insurance money. I talked to you about, the ways I'm different from Gipson and the policy ways I would lead on, but I think I know campaign finance reform is interlinked, intersecting with all of those policies, because if we can get to a place where we have publicly financed elections, ranked choice voting, expanding voting rights, right? Limiting corporate contributions. Imagine the sorts of candidates we can elect. I know I alone can't make the change, but the reason I answered your question with campaign finance reform is I know that if I can pass legislation that can expand a progressive caucus up there, we can really have the sort of legislation that I know most Californians want and deserve.
But do you think that is the number one priority for the constituents in your district? I
think indirect. So you asked me one that's the one that's interlinked, and I do, and I'll tell you why. But that's not to say I won't work on any other legislation, right? Environmental justice is huge for me. Education is huge for me, right? But I see that as an issue I have to lead on, alongside 2 or 3 other major issues, right? If you asked me more, I would have listed more. But the reason I see that is when I talk to a lot of voters at the doors, our top issue when we're canvassing at the doors, actually it was environmental justice, and now it's actually infrastructure, right? Infrastructure is the top issue, and that's not the sexy policy issue, but it's things like street repairs, right? Water pipes, stop signs, wanting speed bumps, wanting clean streets, right? To even wanting economic development, right? That's also built infrastructure. That's actually been the top issue. And to me, when I think about why those needs aren't met, right? What incentive does Gipson have if he feels like he's going to raise 10 times as much as the next opponent to really, unless you're a morally, maybe perhaps a God-conscious good person, to really have good constituent services, right? So I see this accountability as intrinsically tied to what's holding you accountable. If you're accountable to corporate money, if you're accountable to, developers and big landlords and the police, that's who you're accountable to, right? But if your money and the way that you won came from the people, right? it's going to affect the way you approach constituent services, which honestly is aligned to my top issue. My only interest when I win, right, is the voters, right? I got elected by people power and by the voters. That's how I would get elected, right? And so my interest would be to serve the people as best as I can, whether it's because it'll help my reelection or, it's the way I ran my campaign, right? So it's tied to how you would lead as a leader, right? If you're not tied to interests that could contaminate, right, your choices and your decisions every day.
But as an assembly member, you're just one of many. And the issue is sort of like as fundamental as streets and sidewalks are. The city of Los Angeles, some of which is in your district, has a settlement of something like $1.2 billion to fix sidewalks and gutters, curbs, sidewalks and curbs over the next, I think, 10 years. And if you walk the streets of San Pedro, you realize that it's a significant issue. We've got buckled sidewalks, we've got broken curbs. They have $1.2 billion settlement. And as an elected, we have not seen our city council person go after and address that as a simple, this is not a partisan issue, right? But it still doesn't get done. As a legislator, how do you deal with getting the state bureaucracy to concentrate on the legislation that you do pass,
to implement it,
to help constituents in a district?
Yes, it's about accountability and transparency and not caring more about your political friends and caring more about people, to put it simply. So I've heard this a lot. You're absolutely right, James. When bills even get passed, they're not implemented at whatever state agency, whether it's Caltrans, whether it's the city, right? Working with their contractors to get things done fast. And I still think, I know it's tied to not really being accountable, right? I mean, this is what happens. So if, like you said, all that money, you'll use that example, all that money is passed to do those, gutter repairs and sidewalk repairs, but it's not being done. Who's holding that agency accountable, right? Sometimes it's as simple as just, phone calls from your staff really often. Sometimes it takes implementing fines, implementing a timeline, right? I mean, if you don't have accountability, what incentive do the contractors or do the agencies have to get things done? They're just going to sit on the money and wait. I mean, they're not losing anything, right? So it's on what I see my job as a legislator, not just to vote on the right direction and pass good policy. When I've talked to labor unions and when I've talked to folks on the ground, right? What they want is they want a legislator who holds AQMD accountable, holds Caltrans, holds the city councils within my district, which includes Compton and yes, LA City Council accountable, and not play political favorites and say, I'm not going to hold you accountable because you're my friend, right? No, yes, we can have a good relationship, but my first interest is to the people, so you need to do your job or I am going to call you out on it, right? And I'm going to keep pestering you till I get it done. And I believe some agencies should have fines attached to them because it's ridiculous. When we see particularly like illegal dumping and things like that, that's a responsibility of Public Work or Caltrans and it's not getting done. It's now a fire hazard, right? It's not just that it doesn't look good, it's endangering the public safety of the community. So why don't we have fines, right? Really strict accountability for these state agencies.
You're saying that the government should fine its own departments for failure to do things.
It's their responsibility to serve. So if they're not serving as a department, there needs to be accountability. It's like a student that takes a test, right? You study for the test, you do well, you get the grade, right, that you worked for. And if we can do that in our public schools, which, that's a whole other issue. I don't agree with everything we do there either. At the very least, the purpose of government is to serve and be accountable to the people. Why not do that to adults that are responsible for something?
What happens when you have a conflict between the labor unions that work for that department, upper management that is conflicted with prioritizing stuff, and the constituents that are clamoring for the service? You have a tripartite sort of
power structures.
conflagration of,
Right.
of stalling over what may be very important stuff, but
Yeah.
the agency says, well, it's on our list. The labor union says, well, as soon as we can see the money in the account and we get the contract, you know, to do the sidewalk, we'll be there, but we haven't gotten the work order yet, right? How does an elected intercede into that?
Electeds need to be, the best electeds are community organizers, and I think that's the issue. If you look at how, I know Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is in New York, right? But if you look at how she runs her constituent services versus like a corporate Democrat runs their services, I'm not meaning to call out Gipson here, but the Compton residents told me that if you go by his office, City Hall, no one's been there for years. And, not years, maybe months, I don't know years, but they said definitely this past year. So let's say someone in Compton needs something fixed, right? There's no one there to get it done. I've heard times where Gipson's taken his phone off the hook, right? So you're not only inaccessible, but you're not actively reaching out to community, right? The way let me answer your question directly, and then I'll talk about how I would do things, differently and how we would approach that. So to me, it's, yes, having the mindset of a community organizer. When you're an organizer, right, the very different definition of organizing is you have to be able to look at many different parts and make sure they work well together to get a desired result, right? That's what I would do. So you would look at, the hierarchy. Okay, who's responsible? The agency, and then you have, like you said, the labor union, you have the people, right? For me, always keep in mind your responsibilities to the people, right? Okay, so what needs to get done to serve, because they're the ones that elected, right? And this is their taxpayer money that would be paying my salary, right? So they are my top priority in the power structure, honestly, to the voters, right? But what I know needs to happen, and I do this as an organizer, just when I'm organizing for different bills, is you have to have everyone at the table, right? You have to set clear timelines. You have to set clear actions, right? You have to set consequences or accountability if those actions aren't met, and deal with roadblocks, right, as they come up. But there has to be a timeline and accountability. I don't see that happening. I know that's not happening because I've talked to constituents that have said we've called in to the city council's office or to the assembly or whatever office, right? And we called, 6 months or a year ago, right? And we saw no action on it, meaning no one either got back to them. So it wasn't even addressed, right? I'll give you an example. I knocked on a door in Carson, and it was a simple issue of dumping that's been there for something like 3 years, right? And it was causing fires, right? And they said, Fatima, we've reached out to every elected official who represents the area, including Gipson, and we haven't even gotten an email back, right? So I looked at it. So I looked at it as an organizer, and I said, okay, let's see if this part of the area is under Caltrans or if it's under Carson Public Works. That's the first step, right? Okay, great. It's not complicated, right? Okay, it's Public Works, right? Or is it Caltrans? Whatever agency it is, we found that out. I got them in touch. It was a county, it was a county actually that was responsible for that area. So we got them in touch with a county field rep, right? And they took care of it. This happened within a week. That's all it is. And I can only do limited stuff like that right now because I'm one person. But if you have a staff, right, once you're elected, you have a staff of at least, 7, 8, 9 people, some in Sacramento, some in doing field for different areas even, right? So imagine that sort of service and really following through on constituent requests. That's the most unhappy I've heard of people. Is people aren't getting followed up with and getting things dealt with in a timely manner, if at all. So
we started off this conversation today talking about the new district maps. Mm-hmm. And there are many people that are not happy with the new district maps. In fact, you're kind of not happy because you had to move from the former district into the now
the district I knew,
just so you could run for
right.
office. Now, don't you think that part of the problem is that constituents vaguely know, or maybe don't know at all, where political boundaries are and where they are not,
and who their representatives are,
and who the representative is. I mean,
I agree. I agree with that.
The least recognizable person within the political structure is who the assembly person is.
I agree. Yes. Yep.
And unless you were out in the street, so to speak, making noise and getting things done.
That's exactly it, though. There we go.
Nobody knows who you are.
Yep.
And more than likely, as long as you have a D by your name,
they'll vote for you. Yeah.
You're going to get elected.
Yes. You're right. You answered the question I think you're asking me, because you're absolutely right.
How
Yeah.
How do you educate the population?
At the doors directly. Old-fashioned way. You talk to people, right? We've knocked on, thousands of doors. Obviously, strategy-wise, I can't give my exact number on this in this interview, but we've knocked on thousands of doors, and we've been doing this for the past 3 years, right? When I got interviewed by your paper, this was our mechanism, whether it was helping with mutual aid when the pandemic hit, whether it was, we've been organizing to tell constituents to send letters to Gipson about childcare, or whether it's something as local as a shooting that happened in Compton and there's a family organizing, right? We use our door knocking, our canvassing to not just say, hey, there's a candidate running and this is what we stand for, but these are the issues we care about and we also want you to know about these services. At the doors, can I add one thing? At the doors, I'll give you an example. When I was knocking in District 3 in Compton, for example, I would give people, this is your District 3 council member's email. Here you go, right? So to answer your question, you said it, like, unless you're making noise, unless you're out there. I tell my partner that when I get elected, I want to keep knocking on doors, whether I can only do it twice a month, but I want to do it regularly or maybe once a week, right? I want to not just have those town halls and say what I've accomplished and everything. I want to keep knocking on doors because you know what? There are people, this, James, in our district who really, they work a lot and they can't afford to come to the town. They might be working on the weekends, right? So the best way to activate a lot of folks about, the renter protections available, how to get your services met, it's not through a mailer, right? Because a lot of those get lost in the mail, get thrown away. It's by getting volunteers and mobilizing them and having them at the doors. And even when I'm in Sacramento, that's going to be a big part of my field services is I want my field reps to not just be there answering phones. I want them to mobilize and literally knock on doors in impacted areas and get information out.
How many constituents are there in the district?
I know for 8064, it was about, not voters, just constituents, because everyone matters. Everyone matters, not just the voter. Yeah, it was about 500,000. Mm-hmm.
500,000. How many voters are there on par?
On par, registered voters, I would say about half of them are registered voters, on estimate. Mm-hmm.
How many of those actually vote in a primary?
In a primary, even less. Like a midterm primary or a general election primary?
Midterm primary.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's probably about 50,000.
About 10% of the population, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And why is that, James? Can I ask you a question? Why is it that 10% of the population votes? That brings us back to the same issue we've been talking about.
Partly because they don't know what an assembly district is.
Or they don't see any change. So why would they vote?
What the map looks like. And even I have a problem with understanding what the new maps are because, and I probably couldn't even tell you the old map. And I'm a regular voter, okay? And it matters how often you actually see an elected stand up and do something.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're actually, the new 65th district actually takes over what was previously part
64th.
of the 70th. Assembly district with Patrick O'Donnell. So
70% of the district is actually the 64th, like what the 64th was. Yeah. And then I would say, 20 to 30% is new. But the vast majority of it is the 64th. But you're right. San Pedro, the parts of San Pedro, even we have a little more of Long Beach. So those are, those were Patrick O'Donnell's.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what's your critique of Patrick O'Donnell?
Oh, he's part of the same... caucus.
He's a school teacher.
Oh, here's the thing. I have to give him credit on public education. He's done really well by teachers and, whatever, public school education needed. That's it. But to me, when you look at the issues that need to be solved, especially in the most working class areas, they're intersectional issues, right? You can't just be for public schools and then be in the pockets of oil and the police. Like I know, like being a teacher in Watts and still doing work in Watts, that like a student is affected by having asthma, by walking home and having the police brutalize them, by going to, bad schools, right, that aren't invested in, by not having access to healthy food. Like, you can't look at policy, right, in a singular way. All of these issues are intersectional. And so my critique of Patrick O'Donnell is, good on you for fighting for public education, but overall I'd give him I don't know if I want to say this, I'm usually really front, I was going to give him a grade, but maybe I shouldn't go that far. But I would give him a really low grade, with all due respect, not a personal attack, all due respect as a legislator, because we need to hold him accountable. I'll give him a really low grade as a legislator.
So you realize that in the San Pedro part of your district, we probably have more retired former police officers than probably any other part of your district.
Okay, that's all right.
So what are you going to tell them about holding the police accountable?
Yes, and this might lose me points amongst progressives, but I'll say it. So I don't believe in saying things like "fuck the police." Sorry, excuse me, if I can cuss. I don't believe in saying that, and I'll tell you why. There's a couple of good people. One of them is my student, actually. My student said, Ms. Zubair, I've been thinking of going into law enforcement. I said, why? And she said, because, the police officers that are in our community, the reason we feel harassed is they're not from here and they don't understand us. And I feel like at least if I were to get a call from a family that I knew, I would treat them so differently, right? And so I don't blame individual police officers, right? I don't, because right now, that's the system they have, and it's their job, right? To do what the bureaucracy is telling them to do, right? What I would tell police officers is, and they probably will, I know how they'll probably answer this. I'll ask them, when you go out there to answer a call, whether it's a homeless call or a mental health call or even a domestic abuse call, do you feel equipped, right, to deal with it? Most of the time when I've talked to police officers, they say, I don't. And they've admitted, they said, you know what, I should not be doing homeless outreach. I should not be talking, to kids that are in abuse situations or dealing with domestic abuse, situations. That should be the work of a social worker or a mental health worker, right? So that's the way I would approach it. I wouldn't blame the individual, police officer, because I do understand racism exists, white supremacy exists, yes. And I do acknowledge that there are gangs within departments. But I'm not going to look at a police officer and say, you are all those things, right? Because I wouldn't want someone to look at me and say, Fatima's a terrorist because of how she looks, right? But what I would do is have them a conversation, ask them those questions. Do you feel equipped to deal with all the things you're asked to do? And most of the time, what I've heard when I talk to them is like, no, I don't.
So have you ever experienced harassment from either the sheriff's department or the LAPD? Because of the way that you dress?
Yeah.
You are a person of color.
Mm-hmm. I will say that, yes, I'm Muslim, but the Black experience in this country, in Watts, in South LA, and all over California, all the nation, is something that I'm not going to say, oh, I'm Muslim, and so I experience that sort of brutality. Because the thing is, James, I don't, because I'm not Black. I might be brown, but it's being Black in this country that puts you at the brunt of that, and it's the truth, Now, in terms of the Muslim community, some of the things I've been, maybe exposed to is, I know we've had increased surveillance, right, after 9/11 and that kind of thing. So there's likely that sort of thing that's maybe been happening, right, behind the scenes. But in terms of, I'm not going to equate and say I'm experiencing the same thing a Black woman or a Black man or a Latino male woman is experiencing.
Some people might not be able to tell the difference because of your skin tone. Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of Black Muslims.
Yeah, that's actually the greatest percentage of Muslims in the nation is Black Muslims. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Are you supportive of Gipson's legislation in regards to George Floyd law that was signed by the governor, as well as
banning chokeholds,
as well as the legislation that's in Assembly right now, I think, in regards to police abuse and police reform?
Tell me the specific bill, because there's a couple of bills there. Is it the one to hold gangs accountable?
Yeah.
That one?
We're talking about gangs within police departments.
Right. Yeah. Yes. That's what I'm talking about. Yes. Okay. So I'll address both those things separately. Okay. I like the second bill, actually, so I am supportive of that bill because I've seen it in Compton and Watts, and I know it's in East LA when that's not in our district, all over, right? I've seen gangs. It's very real. And then they haven't been held to account. So 100% I would support that bill. And the chokeholds bill, I would too. I do think that though, like, you know, because I'm a big data person, and I do know that the chokehold, right, has been banned in many major police stations, and it hasn't led to outcomes. To me, I'm a results-oriented person, right? Where the chokehold has been banned, has it led to less police abuse and more accountability? It has not. It has not. And that's because we still have qualified immunity. So I would support both of those bills. I just think the chokehold bill was more, it was more like, look, I'm doing something systemic, but it wasn't systemic, because the thing is, it exists a lot already in our police departments where those chokeholds are actually banned, and we haven't seen any decrease in police abuse. And the type of bill that I would be for is for ending qualified immunity, right? Like, I think that would be a truly transformative bill in making sure that when a shooting happens, right, with a police officer kills someone, kills a civilian, right, that they are held to account just like someone else, right? If you have a gang member shoot someone, they're in jail right away, right? We don't see the same accountability for police. And so that's the type of bill I would support. And unfortunately, in that case, not even in my words, but the Youth Justice Coalition said that Gipson was actually one of the ones blocking that in committee, right? And so I'm for, you know, yes, I would. So the short answer is I would vote yes on those bills, but I would go much further to create true transformative justice.
But don't you feel that the problem with LA County, LA City policing has more to do with the culture of the police departments, as opposed to perhaps individual policies, you know, like the accountability of, you know, for you know, the immunity issue for police officers. Mm-hmm. Now, I agree with you that you know, you can't have one standard for those who enforce the law versus those who have to obey the law, right? And we have seen what law enforcement's the police union's response has been to a mandate for vaccinating all police officers or all first responders. So it strikes me as curious, but at the same time consistent. You have one standard for accountability, for, you know, murder, okay, and you have the same standard for not applying to the vaccine mandates. That's a consistency within the system, and you can't have that consistency without there being a culture that is supportive of that.
Yeah, 100%.
It is my belief that you cannot legislate culture. Okay, it is like, you know, we have had you know, equal civil rights legislation on our books since the 60s. The one place that you can't legislate non-discrimination is in our churches. The churches are off limits to the government enforcing anything, you know, in terms of segregation. And the place that America is segregated the most is where they pray.
That's true, yeah.
Now, that's not a blanket truism, but it is generally true. That's a culture. That's a cultural thing.
Yes.
The police departments and other agencies within our country are culturally driven, and you can pass all the laws you want to, but it doesn't necessarily change people's hearts.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Okay.
How does a leader in this nation of ours address the hearts and the minds?
Yeah, and this is going to sound like a simple answer, but it's conversations, right? Culture is created through socializing, right? I mean, if you think about a child being born into this world, they're not born hating anyone or having these prejudices or racist beliefs, right? They're taught them. So to me, I mean, I can use an example, even as a Muslim woman, of, you know, folks that I have become some of my closest friends whose parents have told them, this was when I was in school, hey, don't ever go in her house, she might blow it up, right? But like, they ended up becoming my closest friends, right? Because we talked and they got to know me as a person. They're like, oh, you have similar, you know, life experiences, failures, successes, just like me. And like, we're all human beings, right? So I think, James, to answer your question, you're right. Like, that can be demonstrated by example by leaders, but that becomes the work of all of us in our homes, talking to our neighbors. It could be as simple as a smile, right, to someone that, you know, looks different than you as you're walking down the street. That could change their perspective of you, right? So I really believe it's conversations, it's interactions and relationships we have, and how we're teaching our children in schools, right? Because they spend most of their days in schools, and that's the next generation, right? If you're thinking of talking about changing culture.
So as a person of the Muslim faith, though, you recognize the fact that our Judeo-Christian cultural heritage is ignorant of the fact that the Quran mentions, I think, 17 of the Jewish and Christian notables in the Quran. And
I think more.
And that the Muslim faith is in fact an outgrowth of the
Abrahamic faiths,
the Abrahamic
people of the book, they call it, right?
How do you explain that to some right-wing Christian zealot that wants to shake their finger at you about being Muslim?
That's exactly the friends I befriended. The two friends I talked about were from the boonies in Kentucky, from the Bible Belt, and we talked about it. And part of what we did was they opened up the Bible, I opened up the Quran, and they said, "Wow, there's a whole chapter in the Quran on Mary. On, you know, we say Maryam, but this whole chapter on Mary. You know, Jesus is mentioned more times in the Quran than in the Bible, right?" And they're like, "What? Like, really?" And so, how do you do it? I'll go back to the same boring answer I gave you. Talking about it, conversation. And sometimes if you meet someone who's really set in their ways, it means that me as a Muslim, I spend 95% of that time listening, right? Because a lot of times you have to listen to understand where people are getting their thoughts. And then, you know, you sometimes need to say a couple of things, you know, in response, showing understanding and sharing something that you heard that will help them connect to you. It doesn't have to be huge, right? It could be it could be something small, like, oh, we both like Starbucks, right? Oh my gosh, really? Like, you know, like, because I really think it's when folks are stereotyping and having these prejudice and racist beliefs because they're not seeing someone else as a human being, right? Even my own students, like when you know, I mean, they're great, but when I told them, like Ms. Zubair, you listen to like reggaeton, and, you know, I grew up in the Caribbean, and I not grew up, but I went to school there, but like, really? And, you know, because looking at me, you wouldn't think I liked hip hop. Like, hip hop's one of my favorite sorts of music, right? And that's what I'm talking about. I mean, that's a very innocent, right, judgment my students had of me, but on a grander extreme scale, that's what's happening, right? When people are racist or are being Islamophobic or anti-Semitic, they have these views of a whole group of people, right? And they're not humanizing someone, right? And I don't think it even has to be as something simple as, oh, look, we talk about, you know, the same prophets, right, that we have in our book. I think it's simpler than that, James. I think it's as something as saying, wow, we both like to watch The Bachelorette, or we both like to watch Disney movies, right? And I think that's what it is, you know?
The foundational culture that is always expressed in America is the Judeo-Christian foundational belief, the singular God, prophets of the Bible, etc. And what is excluded from that self-described cultural definition is the fact that there is a third Abrahamic religion that has been on this continent from the earliest days.
Yep.
Okay?
The direct descendant of those two faiths. And we, did you know, as Muslims, we believe in the Old and New Testament? It's you probably know that. Sounds like you know some theology, right? So, did you know, as a Muslim person, I believe in the Old Testament, New Testament, and the Quran, just as the final book. But
well, that would be a good thing for you to mention.
Right.
The first time somebody from some Catholic from San Pedro steps up to you and starts freaking out. That, you're more inclusive than they are because you believe in 3 books and they only believe in 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Or I'll connect with them over our love of, Starbucks or something. Or that. I don't know.
Let's wrap up here a little
bit.
You see this as a fundamental battle for the core values of the Democratic Party, because
core values of our society, James. This is not partisan.
But there's no Republicans running in this.
No, there isn't.
This primary.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
So this is
not yet. There's time.
This is about and with the predominant voter registration by party. This is the only
a fight for the
that
Democratic
going
Party
to change is by a primary challenge.
Right.
You're not going to get the support of the establishment. You're going to be seen as a
troublemaker.
Along the lines of the John Lewis good trouble. So
good trouble, yes, trouble,
okay.
Good, definitely.
So the question is how you go about doing that, and whether or not there are other progressive elements in California who are going to support and endorse you. Progressive organizations. The Sunrise Movement. I think last time you ran, you had Bernie Sanders endorsement. I mean, there's a whole. I mean, Bernie Sanders took 49% of the primary votes in San Pedro.
Oh, that's good news for me. Thank you for sharing that. I did not know that.
All you need to do
I'm going to win San Pedro then.
I think you need to get a Bernie Sanders sweater.
Oh, I have plenty. I have Bernie Sanders pins.
No.
I have a Bernie Sanders canvas.
The mittens.
Yeah. So,
I'm going to be on a town hall with Bernie Sanders soon. I'll tell you about it.
When?
It's going to be in February. I just got asked today it's a group called Run for Something that supports new candidates. And, Bernie also wants to encourage, he that's why he endorsed me. He supports primary challengers that are viable, that have a good message for their community. And so, we're going to be on a panel together with probably one other person too.
So look right into the camera and give your 1-minute elevator speech on why you need to have the votes of everybody in this district.
Okay. All right. So I hope to earn your vote, for this district, and to take, our voices to Sacramento. And I feel like, that you would want to vote for me because of these reasons. I am not tied, right, to politics as usual. So whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, right, your voice is someone that I would listen to, right? And I would only be bought out by all of you. I would not be bought out by special interests. I also don't believe in labels. I know a lot of it, we talk about progressive and everything like that, but you know what? We have some supporters, believe it or not, who are Republican, right? Who at least appreciate the fact that we are not talking at them and we're listening to them. And so that's the type of leadership I would offer. I would bring all stakeholders to the table, and I will make sure that your voice is always heard. And so that's why I think you should vote for me and vote for our campaign. My name? Okay. So I'll end with my name is Fatima Iqbal-Zubair, running for California State Assembly District 65. Our website is fatimaforassembly.com if you want to volunteer, donate, follow us on social media. But most importantly, please do vote for us, and please support us, because our movement is completely grassroots funded, grassroots powered. And I will end with this: we're a strong, progressive, strong, people-powered progressive movement. We are viable. We've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in grassroots donations. So you're believing in a campaign that has a pathway to victory, and I hope that you can get invested and help us get there.
Good.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that was good. Good questions, James.
Well, I'm learning this stuff.